Hi everyone. These are going to be the videos on rigging, so I'm going to break these down into probably a few different videos on the different sections that we've covered in lessons. So we'll do bones, placement, and sort of mirroring, naming conventions, that sort of thing. We'll have a video on skinning. We'll have one on weights, one on IKs, and then we'll also have one on controllers and how to do controllers and constraints because it can get quite confusing. So the first thing we are going to do, hopefully you have either this mesh or a mesh you would like to rig open in Maya. We are going to go to the 4 viewport layout so that we've got our top, front and side as well as our perspective as well. So this is going to be useful just so we can see the bones from a lot of different angles and make sure they are placed correctly. So I usually like to start in the front layout. So I'm just going to hit space over the front layout and maximize that. And then I just want to make sure in my shading tab that I have two options. So I have wireframe on shaded because it gives us much more point of reference when we're looking at the mesh. And we're also going to have X-ray joints on so that we can see our joints and our bones through the mesh and they're not being occluded by it. Now, the first thing we're going to do is make sure that in this drop down in the top left, we are set to the rigging layout. By default, Maya will always be set to the modeling layout, but it usually saves that every time you change it. So I'm going to make sure we are in rigging, which changes all of these options up at the top. Okay, so now we're in the rigging layout, we're going to go to skeleton and click on create joints. So this is what's going to create all of our bones for us. So we're going to do that first root joint down here around the waist. Then let's do a couple of spine joints as well. So just running along roughly where the spine would be. And I'm going to stop probably just here, just in the middle of the chest. So we can always spawn off from that point. Now, if we hit Q to come out of that bone placement tool, so this bone size is pretty good. It's very easy to see. It's very easy to work around with everything. But sometimes Maya will default the bones to being really, really small or really, really huge. So if you go to display, animation, and then to joint size, we can change these. So sometimes it will look like this and they'll be tiny. Sometimes it will look like that and they'll be huge. We just want a sort of nice size so we can easily identify where they are, and we can always edit them if needs be. Cool, so now that we've got the spine, I'm going to go back into my perspective view and have a look at it. So currently, it's just a straight line of bones. But if we look at any pictures of the spine, so from any medical journals or anything like that, we would know that the spine isn't straight. The spine has a slight curve to it. So we're just going to add in that curve. So probably around here, and then it starts to curve backwards at the top. And generally speaking, as long as the bones are staying roughly center mass, that should be okay. We don't need this to be in the exact position of the spine. If it was, it would be much further back here. We want to keep it roughly center mass of our mesh, but still introduce that curve of the spine. And I'm fairly happy with that now. So I'm going to go back into my front view, and now we're going to start to create the first side of the arms. So our character is looking straight at us, so everything on our left hand side is going to be the character's right hand side. So first thing we want to do to be able to pick up where we left off with joints is find our joint in the outliner. Now I can only see joint 1, so if we click the little grey plus to the left of it, we'll see that it reveals all of the bones after. So we've got joint 1, 2, 3, and 4. I want to pick up where I left off with joint 4. So I'm going to go to skeleton and click on create joints again to get back into that tool. And then in the outliner, I'm going to click on joint 4 because that's what I want it to connect to. So the first thing we're going to do for this character, because it's a more humanoid character, humanoid mesh, is we're going to create a clavicle bone. So the clavicle sort of runs just under your collarbone and connects over to the shoulder and gives us that rolling shoulder motion. So we can lift our shoulder, drop it, move it backwards and forwards. And it's just going to create some more freedoms for this rig if we want to use them. So I'm going to place it roughly around here. That looks good to me. And now I can create the shoulder joint. So I'm just going to click down into the shoulder. Then we can go down to the elbow. And lastly, we're going to go down into the wrist. Cool. So just like we did with the spine, where we placed everything and then we went into perspective and moved it around to make sure it works, we're going to do that again. But for the arm, I prefer to do it from the top-down view. So I'm just going to turn the grid off to make things easier to see. So we can see that this clavicle doesn't quite sit where we want it to, and that affects where the shoulder, elbow, and wrist are. So I'm going to just select the clavicle bone, go to the Move tool, and move it a little bit further back so it's in line with the shoulder. And make sure the shoulder's in place. Then we can just move that elbow and make sure the wrist is in the correct place as well. Perfect. And then we can always go into perspective and inspect it from any other view. I maybe want this elbow to be a little bit further down, and then just correct the wrist again. And that looks pretty good to me. Maybe the shoulder needs to be a bit lower. There we go. So now we can see that it follows the shape of the arm with our bones. So the next thing we need to do is start our naming conventions and start renaming these bones so we know what they are. Making sure that you name your bones and you name them well enough is going to really help if your rig ever breaks and someone else has to fix it. If somebody wants to add an extra controller to your rig, if an animator knows a little bit of rigging, and when it gets to the weight painting. So for weight painting, we're going to need to know exactly what each bone is. So naming them now and naming them as we go is a very useful thing. So if we go back to the outliner, and on joint 4, we're just going to keep clicking that plus until every bone is revealed. So currently we've got joints 1 through to 8, and we're going to start renaming them. So if we double click on them in the outliner, and our first joint, that root joint, is always going to be called root. Next, the spine can have different naming conventions. Some people like to call it spine 1, spine 2, spine 3. That's usually what I go for. But some people might prefer more anatomical names. Some people might just call it spine lower, spine mid, spine upper. It's totally up to you what you want to do. So we're going to call it spine underscore 1, spine underscore 2, and spine underscore 3. So we always use underscores in naming conventions for names. They can't hold spaces. They will always be replaced by underscores as well. So something to get used to. So joint 5 is our clavicle joint, but it is on the right hand side of the character's body. So we need to make sure that we call it R underscore clavicle, because this is going to be on the right hand side. And the naming convention of R underscore is going to be very important to us when we mirror these bones along. So the next one is going to be R underscore shoulder, R underscore elbow, and R underscore wrist. There we go. So now that we have this naming convention down, we can tell Maya to automatically change this to L underscore when we mirror over to the left hand side. So we're going to do that mirroring now so that we've automatically got the left arm rigged in the same way that the right arm is. Mirroring is something that can be quite important if you ever want to attach mocap data to your characters. Making sure that your bones are in sort of precise mirrored starting positions to each other can be quite important. There are ways to work with offsets if you've got a very stylized character that isn't symmetrical, but it does require a little bit more playing around with things. So this is just basic rigging for now, so we're going to just do a basic symmetrical rig. So if we click on the right clavicle, we should see that every bone that falls after the right clavicle gets selected, and we know that because it's turned green. So we just need to select the right clavicle, then we can go to skeleton, and where we see mirror joints, we're going to click on the options box to the right hand side of that, and it should open the options. So I've already got some values in here from previous rigging, so we're just going to reset everything, and we'll talk about what this does. So if we start at the top, we've got mirror across. Mirror across is basically the axis plane that it will mirror from one side to the other. So currently, by default, it is set to X, Y. So depending on what axis our character is on, this could be correct, but for our character, this is not correct. So our character is going to use Y and Z. For the reason that we want to mirror straight down the middle of our character. So we need an axis that goes straight through, which for us is our Z axis, or the blue axis. And we also need it to go straight up and down, which is the Y axis. So we're going to use Y and Z. If your character's brought in, rotated in a different way, yours might be XY, it might be X and Z, depending on what you've made it in. Mirror function, I always use behavior rather than orientation. It can just give more consistent results. And then replacement names for duplicated joints. So this is where that naming convention is going to become important. So we want to search for R underscore, because that's what we've named everything so far. And we're going to replace it with L underscore. So when Maya mirrors everything, all of the new joints it creates, it's going to take away the R underscore and replace it with an L underscore. It makes it super easy for us. So now that we've set this up, if we hit apply, we can see our right arm, or left arm, sorry, has been automatically created. The bones look identical, and they all have that same naming convention, just with the L underscore instead of R underscore, which is very nice and easy for us. So these options are going to be perfect for when we do the leg as well. So we'll quickly run through the leg. So for the leg, we want to go back into our last used tool, which is the joint tool. And then we want to spawn off from the root joint. So I'm going to click on root, and then I'm going to create the hip bone. So probably around here. Then I want the knee, which will probably be around here. And then I'm just going to do an ankle for this. And we won't do the foot just because we're going over the very, very basics. So if we hit Q to come out of that tool, and we're going to do the same thing as always, we are going to go into one of our other views and just make sure things line up. So the side view works quite well for this. Let's turn the grid off again. So we can see that the hip joint is pretty spot on. It's center mass, but the knee joint is way out. So we're going to move this back, and then the ankle joint, we're going to move back as well. So the knee joint we can have a little bit further forward, and the hip joint a little bit further back. So one of my top tips for you is when you are creating a rig that you intend on giving an IK, which we'll go over in a future video, you're going to want to introduce a little bit of bend into these bones already, because that's pretty much just going to guide the IK as to which way the joints should bend. So we can see now that we've got this little bit of a bend in here. And then if we go to perspective, I'm fairly happy with those bones. There we go. So now we're going to go through the same process again. So joint 1 we're going to rename, and this one is going to be R underscore hip. The next one is going to be R underscore knee, and the last one R underscore ankle. There we go. And then to mirror again, we click on the top joint, go to skeleton, mirror joints, and then because everything's already set up, we can just hit apply or mirror, and it's already there for us, and all of those bones are correctly named. Now, obviously, we can go further with this. If we wanted to rig every single finger, we could come down into the hand, do different joints for each of the fingers, the thumb. We could go up into the head, and we could also go down into the feet as well. For this video, because we're just going over the very basic concepts, I'm not going to do that. Now, we'll save skinning for the start of the next video, which is going to be skinning and weight painting merged together, so we can start to understand the concepts of what weight painting is and how to use it. So hopefully it's been helpful. If you do have any questions, obviously message me, email them over, leave a comment, whatever it may be. And hopefully it's been very helpful. Thanks.